Welcome back. Today we're going to be covering Chapter 13, Self and Personality. We can think of personality as your typical behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are consistent across a variety of circumstances. While personality is the consistency of these things, we also all have our own unique combination of personality traits. Our self-concept, is somewhat difficult to define, but we might think of it as our mental representations of our personal experiences, as well as the awareness of our physical body and the understanding that we are separate and unique from others. To summarize, your sense of self is who you believe you are. And it may include things like gender, age, student status, interpersonal style, personal characteristics, and body image. The self-schema is the cognitive part of our self-concept. This is an integrated set of memories, beliefs, and generalizations about ourselves that we organize as a network of interconnected ideas within the mind. Our working self-concept is our immediate experience of the self at any given time. This is largely contingent on context. For example, the man at the keyboard here may compare himself to the other workers in the office, and depending on the composition of that group of other workers, he may focus on the fact that he is male or the fact that he is black. Self-esteem is the evaluative component of self-concept. That is, how we feel about ourselves. A number of theories suggest that self-esteem is based on how we believe other people perceive us. This idea, or these set of ideas, are called reflected appraisal. One of these theories is the sociometer theory, which suggests that our self-esteem is inversely related to the probability of rejection. The less likely we are to be rejected, the higher our self-esteem. While higher self-esteem is related to happiness, it has very little, if any, relationship to objective life outcomes, such as success at work or in personal relationships. In fact, there are some negative consequences to having too high of a self-esteem. When self-esteem is unrealistically high, this is called narcissism, and there's some evidence that this has been increasing in our society over the past several decades. As you can see in the chart here, self-esteem also varies as a function of gender and age. And you might think about why people would have higher self-esteem at some ages and why males typically have higher self-esteem than females over most of the lifespan. One of the effects of increased self-esteem in the United States is the better than average effect. Most of us, most of the time, believe that we are better than average at most socially acceptable activities. Since it's statistically impossible for everybody to be above average, this suggests that our sense of self is somewhat inflated relative to our realistic competencies. In fact, looking at the chart here on the right, people like their names and the initials in their names more than they like other letters in the alphabet. We all tend to have positive illusions about ourselves. We experience the better than average effect. We have inflated beliefs about how much we can control things. And we have an unrealistic, optimistic view of our personal future. These illusions are not necessarily a problem, though. Most people have these illusions, and they tend to be associated with an average higher level of mood than people who are more realistic in their appraisals. One of the ways that we maintain a positive sense of self is by making comparisons with other people. When we make downward comparisons, we're comparing ourselves to someone who is seen as worse off than we are, and this tends to protect our self-esteem. Upward comparisons can make us feel less competent, but we are often able to overcome this by making temporal comparisons. That is, while we may see some people as being ahead of us now, we believe that in the future, we will be better off than we are now, just as we are better off now than we were in the past. In Chapter 12, we talked about a number of cognitive biases that slant our beliefs in a particular way. Another one of these is the self-serving bias, which is our tendency to take credit for success but blame failure on external factors. For example, you might think that you did well on the test because you're intelligent and you studied hard. On the other hand, if you didn't do so well, you can blame it on the professor asking the wrong questions. If they'd only asked the questions about what you'd studied, you would have done much better. Finally, our sense of self is affected to a good degree by the type of culture that we live in. In collectivist cultures, self-esteem tends to be, on average, lower than in individualistic cultures. And in these collectivist cultures, self-esteem depends on how well you fit in, as opposed to your personal accomplishments, as is the case in individualistic cultures. Moving on to personality theories, we start with Sigmund Freud's psychodynamic theory. Psycho from psyche, the mind, and dynamic from movement. Freud's idea is that there is a lot of movement and conflict among elements in the mind, and that the way we resolve these conflicts determines the personality characteristics that we have. The first thing to remember about Freud is that he divides the mind into 3 levels of consciousness. The conscious level is what we're thinking about right now. The pre-conscious level is information that we're not currently thinking about, but that we could easily bring into consciousness. And finally, the unconscious level, which Freud thought to be the largest, is material that the mind cannot retrieve without access to special techniques such as psychoanalysis. Freud also thought of the mind as having 3 components. The first of these is the id, which is unconscious and operates according to the pleasure principle. That is, I want what I want and I want it now, and I don't care about the effects it has on anyone else. The id is the first part of the personality that is present at birth. The superego, which is roughly translated into the conscience, is the internalized rules from society that we keep in mind to regulate our behavior. Finally, the ego is the part of personality which must mediate the conflicts between id and superego. It uses the reality principle. I want certain things, but there will be social or other kinds of sanctions if I act on those desires. You can see this conflict reflected here. The id wants pleasure and avoidance of pain. The superego wants you to follow rules, and the ego must deal with these 2 competing demands. Because the ego is under such stress, it must use defense mechanisms to protect itself. Several of them are listed here in the table. For example, denial involves refusing to acknowledge where the anxiety is coming from. Repression is to push the experience of anxiety entirely into the unconscious. Projection is to blame someone else for your particular anxieties. Reaction formation is warding off anxiety-producing thoughts by working to overemphasize the opposite. That is, if you are concerned that you might hurt someone, you might become involved in a peace organization. Rationalization is, I did it, but I had a good reason. Displacement is shifting an emotion from one target to another. In other words, your boss yells at you. You can't yell back at the boss, but on the way home, you stop and yell at the clerk at the grocery store. Finally, sublimation, which Freud saw as the only long-term effective defense mechanism, is to channel socially unacceptable impulses into constructive behavior. For example, you have aggressive impulses and you become a professional fighter. Then you can express those impulses and get paid for it too. Probably the most controversial aspect of Freud's theory is his belief in a stage theory of psychosexual development. At each stage in development, the libido, or psychic energy, is channeled on one of the body's erogenous zones, or sources of pleasure. At each stage, there's a conflict between the child and the parents over who is going to control access to this libidinal energy. In the oral stage, the conflict is over weaning. In the anal stage, over toilet training. And in the phallic stage, the Oedipus complex arises. Freud had seen a performance of the Sophocles play Oedipus Rex and came to believe that this reflected a deep-seated unconscious drive in all humans. The basic idea is that the young boy becomes angry about the amount of attention his father is getting from his mother. In response, he develops a plan to kill the father and take his place. The father, of course, somehow knows about this, and so the boy is afraid that the father will castrate him in response. This leads to a complete reanalysis of his plan, in which instead of killing the father and replacing him, the boy decides to emulate the father, including his morals, which is where the superego comes from. As you can imagine, this is an extremely controversial position. All of this is completed by about the age of 6, after which children enter a latency stage of no conflict until puberty. And if everything has gone well up to this point, they reach the genital stage, at which they developed appropriate opposite-sex relationships, settle down, get married, have children, get a dog and a station wagon. According to Freud, there is conflict at each of these stages. And if the conflict is not resolved properly, people become fixated at those stages. That is, some of the libidinal psychic energy is stuck at that stage and is not available for resolving subsequent stages. Therefore, people develop personality conflicts and difficulties that are characteristic of the stage at which they became fixated. Freud continues to influence contemporary thought about psychotherapy, though many of his ideas have been discarded. Neo-Freudians, or theorists that take some clues from Freud but certainly don't follow his entire theory, and follow object relations theory. In this approach, rather than focusing on conflicts with the parents, relationships with people in our adult lives are analyzed instead. Another type of personality theory, the humanistic approach, is well represented by Carl Rogers' person-centered approach. Humanistic theories emphasize the innate goodness in people and our own capacity for growth. Rogers emphasized two issues as crucial in personality development. The first issue is how we understand ourself, and the second is how others see and evaluate us. This second issue is manifest in his concept of conditions of worth. He believed that most parents provide love and support that is conditional. They love their children on the condition that the children do what the parents want them to do and live up to the parents' standards. This condition creates a discrepancy between a child's self and how her parents evaluate her. In turn, this discrepancy leads to development of a personality based on conditions of worth. Parents who do not approve of their child's behavior may withhold their love. As a result, children quickly abandon their true feelings, dreams, and desires. To prevent conditions of worth, Rogers encouraged parents to accept and prize their children no matter how the children behave or how close they come to meeting parents' expectation. This approach allows for consistency between a child's self and how his parents evaluate him. Such consistency leads to the development of a personality based on unconditional positive regard. In other words, parents might express disapproval of a child's bad behavior, but at the same time they should express their love for the child, him or herself. According to Rogers, a child raised with unconditional positive regard would develop a healthy sense of self-esteem and become a fully functional person. A third type of personality theory are the social cognitive approaches. One of the early ones of these is Julian Rotter's 1954 expectancy theory. According to this theory, our behaviors are part of our personality. They come from how we think about two things: our expectancy for reinforcement and the values we ascribe to those reinforcers. This combination leads to our locus of control. People with an internal locus of control believe they have control over the rewards and punishments they experience, while those with an external locus of control do not. Another social cognitive theory is Albert Bandura's reciprocal determinism, in which environment, personal factors, and behavior all interact with each other to determine the person's personality. Another set of personality theories, trait approaches, focus more on description than on explanation. Trait theories assume that personality is a collection of traits or behavioral descriptions, and there are several of these. All of them assume that a particular personality trait ranges from very low levels to very high levels, with most people concentrated on the average middle. Hans Eysenck developed one of the early ones of these, where introversion and extroversion were opposite poles of one trait, and what he called neuroticism, or tendency to be upset about things, was the second trait. He later added a third dimension, psychoticism, which we would now call constraint. The dominant trait theory in personality research today is the five-factor theory, or Big Five, originally proposed by Costa and McCrae. This approach holds that we all have 5 basic personality dimensions, and that we all vary on each of these independently. These are openness to experience, or how much we like new things, conscientiousness, or how careful we are, extroversion, how outgoing we are, agreeableness, how trusting and helpful we are, and neuroticism, how much we worry. Remember that levels of each of these traits are independent of levels on any of the others. There is some biological basis for our various personality traits. For example, the reticular activating system is the set of connections in the brain that maintains our level of awareness and consciousness. In extroverts, this tends to be lower than normal, resulting in them seeking out interactions with people to raise the level of mental activity, whereas the opposite is true for introverts. Further evidence for the biological basis of personality traits comes from studies of twins who tend to be more similar in terms of these traits than less closely related persons. A construct that's closely related to personality is that of temperament. In fact, some psychologists consider the two inseparable. Temperament is the innate, biologically based tendency to feel or act in certain ways that is apparent from birth. And there are three types of temperamental traits that people have studied the most: activity level, emotionality, or how much things bother us, and sociability, how well we get along with other people. Obviously, both our innate biology and the environment affect our behavior, and the interaction of biology and situation tends to determine personality at any given time. As we get older, our environments tend to become more stable, and thus the consistency in our personality increases as we age. There are a number of ways that psychologists measure personality. One of these is projective test. For example, the figure on the top is one of the Rorschach inkblot test figures. Subjects are instructed to view the figure and report what it reminds them of. The idea behind projective measures is that people will project onto an ambiguous stimulus the unconscious conflicts they have. And so these measures are used more often by psychodynamically oriented psychologists. Self-report measures have questionnaires in which there are a limited number of responses from which one must choose. They are also sometimes called forced choice measures. These lead to a score on various personality dimensions that the psychologist can use in assessing the person's individual personality. We can also obtain information about our personality from other people. Sometimes others see us in ways that we don't see ourselves. We may have blind spots about our own personality. Over the last several decades, there has been some debate between those who see the person and those who see the situation as being more important in determining behavior. Walter Mischel proposed that the situation is more important, something he called situationism, though later in his career he dropped his opposition to personality as a driver of behavior. Really, it depends on the situation. In what are known as strong situations, there is a significant social pressure to behave in certain ways. Elevators, religious services, job interviews. In weak situations, there is less of a social pressure to act in a particular way, and so personality becomes more important in determining behavior. Culture can also affect personality, though there are largely consistencies across cultures. I hope you've enjoyed this chapter and are looking forward to the last chapter of the semester next week.